I still think we need more transparency in how breaches happen. We're wasting a lot of failures. I just heard a quote from Henry Ford who said, "The only true mistake is the one you learn nothing from." Defenders think in lists and attackers think in graphs. John Lambert, I think it was at Microsoft. And yet we have these huge, PCI has 300 plus requirements on it, right? Like we have these huge, broad checklists. Security standards and frameworks have not optimized on stopping ransomware, right? They've optimized on compliance. It's incredibly broad. And, if you're going to go through these huge checklists, you're not going to be focused on what attackers are having success with, so that it's a focus problem. And every AI browser has been hit with this. Every AI coding tool has been hit with this. We're seeing attackers assuming there's going to be a command line AI agent on engineer systems. So we actually saw an NPM attack like a month ago where they actually used a prompt, assuming Amazon Q or Claude Code is going to be sitting there on a laptop. And instead of guessing at where the SSH keys are going to be, they just hand a prompt off and they say, hey, go find this stuff. If there's any, crypto wallets, grab those too, pack them all up, upload them to this Git repository, create a Git repository, and that's where we'll pick them up. So all of a sudden, AI is turned into the attacker's number one accomplice.
I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, someone who's been shaping the cybersecurity industry from every possible angle for nearly 2 decades. Adrian Sanabria started in IT, moved into security as a practitioner, then founded Savage Security, which was acquired by ThreatCare. Today, Adrian shares his research via the Defender Initiative and hosts Enterprise Security Weekly, which even our founder, Vivek, was on at RSA last year. Well, the tables have turned a bit today. Welcome to the show, Adrian.
Thank you. Thank you. Just looking at the video here, it looks like 2 podcast hosts interviewing each other, which is kind of what's happening.
Yeah, it is. It is kind of what's happening. Well, let's talk a little about your career journey and philosophy. Let's start from the beginning. What's your cybersecurity origin story? How did you get into the field?
Yeah, I think I was always interested in it. The idea of hacking a computer seemed like magic, and anything that's complex enough that I can't just look at it and understand it. I was the kind of kid that would take things apart to see how they worked. It is very attractive to me. Later in life, I found out I have ADHD, which explains a lot of my behaviors and a lot of my career path. But trying a bit of everything out, I guess we'll probably talk to that. But yeah, so to teach myself tech, I just ran my own infrastructure. Back in the late 90s, when we first went from dial-up to broadband and we had always-on connectivity, I decided to run some servers out of the apartment that I lived in. So I registered a domain and I ran my own website and ran my own email for quite a while. And I ended up running, a lot of other people can probably relate to this who are in tech. I ended up running everybody else's web servers too. They're like, oh, you know how to run a website. I want to do a website. I think I was running 5 or 6. And, when I started getting calls at 2 a.m, I knew it was time to call it quits. But my first big career job was at the world's 6th largest payment processor. I had a friend who worked there, and he got my foot in the door. And I think 1 or 2 weeks in, I started doing incident response because nobody else knew how to do it. There was one guy in security, and he was in that role because he screwed up in IT. And they're like, okay, let's put this guy where he can't do any more damage. If you've ever read the Peter Principle, that's what happened to him. He failed upwards. So yeah, I was actually doing incident response long before I officially had a security title. So I was there for 4 years, I think, until about maybe a little bit less than 4 years. I think it was 2004 that I officially made the formal switch over from the IT side to the security side. I was maybe security person number 3, number 4, something like that.
Yeah, I see. I have ADHD as well. I think IT kind of, fed into or made it useful, I think. Was able to go from, subject to subject and, go and look into tech kind of deeply. And it kept my attention. I think my career must have started, maybe a decade before yours, because I was head on into the dial-up communities and stuff like that. I mean, I had a computer like 1982 and 83, 84, and hacking and cracking and, freaking and all those kinds of things were things that, I was involved when I was young. It was like fun. There was a lot of things to kind of do. And, I actually had a business, an MSP doing, hosting people's web servers and doing their email and everything else. But, it was actual, not just in my apartment, actually like in a colo data center and that kind of stuff. But very interesting, how you got into the field. And like you said, it's like you're doing incident response. And in IT, we do a lot of incident response kind of things, when we're trying to recover services, but it's not typically because there's a bad actor in place, right? We're just trying to get things back up and running and that kind of stuff.
Actually, quick funny anecdote. I should mention before I got in, so I do consider that my first big career gig, but I had jobs in tech before that. I worked at CompUSA, which was very interesting. Okay. And I did internet tech support for 2 ISPs. Here in East Tennessee. And the first one, ICX Online, was a very interesting one because that's where Metallica.com was hosted. And I was there during the whole Napster debacle when it got denial of service and hacked and taken down. That server was just on the other side of the wall from where I was taking dial-up tech support calls.
Wow. Yeah. This is a long time ago, right? World was a different place. People were like trying to use SLIP to internet protocol for serial lines and that kind of stuff just to get to the internet. Different world that we live in today comparatively. So you got into your official security job in around 2004. I think that's about the same time that I took on I had actual security engineering work to do. It was around 2003, 2004. Before that, it was just all IT kind of stuff for me too. So 20 years since you've gotten into security, do you describe yourself as an optimist after seeing security from over that period of time?
Yeah, I think there are reasons to have optimism. I think in cybersecurity, you find a lot of folks who are mission oriented, who are very passionate about it. I think the challenge is pointing that optimism, that enthusiasm in the right direction, right? I think that's been the most challenging thing is finding data that we can use to make sure that what we're doing is actually moving the needle, actually having an impact. That I think that's what results in a lot of the burnout, a lot of the frustration that we see in our industry. We don't have a seat at the table. We're not being taken seriously. If you dig, there is data there. There is a path that I think we can take. And as long as we have these mission-oriented people that care, it's still a young industry. I think we'll eventually figure out that path. Like it might be insurance companies that put us on it, and get us to focus, but mentioning ADHD, the industry, that is a big issue in the industry. There are billions of dollars of marketing in the industry, and it makes it really hard to focus on some of the fundamental stuff when there's always something new coming out, which is typically triggered by new things in the tech industry, right? When generative AI came out, every roadmap at every company got scrapped and rewritten, or at least every tech company. And then when agentic, MCP, Anthropic released MCP, again, every roadmap just got wiped out. And it just becomes so hard to focus on some of these fundamentals when the technology is changing that fast.
I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why it's kept my interest for so long is just because it changes. There's constantly something else to learn. As a CISO, I worry about the industry because I think that when you and I were younger and we got into the industry, it was our passion about computers and IT that kind of kept us there. And then security happened to us. And then that kept us kind of like a challenge. There was like always that challenge. For me, there's a lot of passion for security that I have. And again, a part of it is probably just because it feeds me dopamine as, just learning opportunities, right? But what I'm seeing, having managed hundreds and hundreds of cybersecurity practitioners, is that I see there's kind of a shift in the dynamics of people in the industry. And I'll tell you before I say this, because it's going to sound negative, I am actually an optimist about this too. I'm actually optimistic about it. But I think there's this kind of like inflection point that's happening in the industry right now. And it's probably been happening for some time, but I can kind of start talking about it today, is that we're starting to see a lot of folks that are entering the practice and the industry that are, it's like a job. It's like being a lawyer or something. They go to school, they get a cybersecurity degree, they come out.
Right. It's a 9 to 5.
It's a 9 to 5 job.
They don't go to conferences. Yeah, they collect certifications maybe, but they're not really part of the community. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, exactly. They're not part of the community. They're wondering why they don't get jobs and why, when you have gray hair people like me that are making hiring decisions, it's like I don't feel the passion that they have for it. And it's hard for me to kind of, because I want people to be passionate about the work that they do. But I do see that there's kind of like this kind of theme of the 9 to 5 job, and that, they want to come in, do their job, and then go home and then have their weekends. And they're not interested in the incident response, which I think is some of the most interesting stuff that happens when you're in security, is the incident response.
ADHD, like that feeds that dopamine machine. Like you can really hyper focus during an incident, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But it's also, I always call it like the spy v spy, spy versus spy kind of activity, because it's like, action, response, stimulus response. And you're kind of seeing what's happening in that field or in that activity that's happening, and then how do you contain it, et cetera. But, given that, you still feel optimistic about where we're going? I mean, like I said, I think it's an inflection point. I think it's something that can be corrected, but I mean, how does that kind of...
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the inflection point, because this is something I think about a lot. And I think a big part of the problem was that when we didn't have data, we had to make guesses. We're like, changing your password every 45, 90 days. That seems reasonable. That seems like a good idea, right? Let's roll with that. And so a lot of our standards and a lot of our frameworks still have a lot of these guesses in it. But now we live in a time when ransomware is happening so often. We have so many research teams at vendors putting out reports saying, here's the TTPs, here's what they're doing. They're just rinse, repeat, doing the same stuff over and over again. And it works for them. They get in, they lock you out of your systems, and they send you the extortion, the ransom letter. And so, we're at this point where all the standards and frameworks and everything are telling us to do this huge mountain of tasks, this huge list. And we call those the basics. Those are the fundamentals, right? Where on the other side, we have this information, and it's still not enough. I still think we need more transparency in how breaches happen. We're wasting a lot of failures. I think I just heard a quote from Henry Ford, who said, the only true mistake is the one you learn nothing from. And we do a lot of learning nothing from mistakes in this industry. In fact, at some companies, that's most of a lawyer's job, is to keep the details of the breach from getting out, right? And I think that's the inflection point, or at least the one I'm really interested in. That really frustrates the mission-oriented folks, the folks who are just there to do the 9 to 5. They might scratch their head about it, but they're not too worried about it. And we just have all these tasks, all these tools that I think of as busy work generators. Like you can go to work all day, log into a SIM, an IDS, a WAF, something like that. You can click around, you can tune stuff, you can look at alerts. And you know what? If you didn't show up for the next 2 years, nobody'd notice, right? There would be no measurable impact on the security program. And I think that's the inflection point where eventually, and I mentioned it before, I think cyber insurance might be what drags us into the future, and forces us to actually start using this data, because you won't be able to cash in on a policy if you're not doing some of these more, like it's a much smaller list of the things that the attackers have success with. Like the MITRE ATT&CK framework is huge, but I think of it like an encyclopedia or a dictionary. Like if I'm going to write a book, my goal isn't to use everything there. We shouldn't be building detections for everything in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It should be more of a heat map. Like what are the attackers actually doing? What are they actually using? And that's what we should go after.
Yeah, I could definitely, we could talk about that for a long time too. So let me, because again, I think I agree with you 100%. I think I love the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I love it that it gives me insight into techniques and what's happening, and it gives definition to a lot of things. I like that part of it. I often think that for most practitioners, the kill chain is good enough, right? Just kind of figuring out where you are in this whole the attack sequence, and where how the attack is progressing, or not, or degressing, or how is the attacker making progress. I think that if you just stick to the kill chain, you can get most of what you need to get done, just knowing where you are, so you can go backwards and forwards and see what you missed. I think the framework adds to it. It gives it a lot more flavor, bringing them together. But I think that's kind of like, from my perspective, a little bit more of an advanced task for most SOCs that I've seen. But I'm super curious about the cybersecurity insurance angle. Like, how does that work? Why do you think that that's going to be how that brings us in the future? I mean, there's definitely actuaries that are involved there that are trying to make decisions, and I tend to trust the data and the numbers and actuaries a little bit more than everyone else having an opinion. So, but tell me more about why you think the cybersecurity insurance industry is going to help us.
Well, I mean, it all comes down to financial losses, right? And that's the one instrument you're using to recover some of those losses. And they had a real bad time of it a couple of years ago, to the point to where some just turned off their cyber product, right? And they're like, we're just not going to insure cyber stuff. So those questionnaires are changing every year, and we're starting to see insurtechs. Like, there are cyber insurance policies where if you open RDP to the public internet, you'll get a call that same day or next day saying, "What are you doing? Fix it. Turn it back off."
Right.
So they're actually actively monitoring. And I'm not aware of any other insurance product except maybe the car insurance, where you put the thing in the ODB2 connector on your car, and they monitor how you drive, and that changes your rates. But we are starting to see this kind of real-time active monitoring of policyholders, and mapping that to things that we know will get you popped, like exposing your firewall management interface to the public internet, or exposing RDP to the public internet. Attackers are just constantly scanning for that stuff. They're going to pick it up. And like, nobody wants to go without insurance, so insurance is in a position to raise that bar, and to make it, if it gets more difficult to get insurance, companies are going to have to improve their operations to clear that bar.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting that you pointed out that there's like very few in other industries or insurance that you go and they constantly monitor you, right? But it's interesting when you're buying insurance, right? And they start coming out with, well, we found all these servers, and we found this. Is this your domain? This is not your domain. Is this thing has a vulnerability? You got to go patch that first. And why is RDP open over here?
A lot of it's outside in focus right now, like the security scorecard companies, like BitSight, and security scorecard. But it will eventually focus on the inside as well. In fact, like Cowbell Cyber is already doing some of that. They have their Cowbell factors, I think they call them. So they've expanded far beyond just scanning your external IP space.
Very interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about security research. You founded the Defenders Initiative, because I think this is going to kind of play into a couple of things. One, what's happening in the industry from a cybersecurity perspective, and people looking at us from the outside, and a lot of information loss. Like you were saying about, you learn from failures and you build a more successful program by looking at the micro incidents that happen every single day. All that work that's being done by SOCs today, we do not capture enough information from those attacks that are happening every single day that we can make use of. So I think there's some, gaps there on how we best use our people talent to understand our security posture and do more about it. But you founded the Defender Initiative to feature and support decades of cybersecurity research. Tell us about your work there and some of your recent research highlights.
Yeah, so it kind of started with a consulting firm that I founded with a good friend of mine, Kyle Bupp, back in 2017. And what we wanted to do was to take the consulting offerings and think about, okay, like if we were building these from scratch with the benefit of hindsight, what would a pen test look like? What other services would we build that would be useful to companies? And we ended up, we did build a replacement for the penetration test. It looks kind of like purple team assessments look today. But we just identified where a lot of the consultants' time is kind of wasted to no benefit of the client, and looked for ways to erase that. And I still need to fully document that and share that. But I did do a series of talks in 2018 called "It's Time to Kill the Pen Test," because I think the vast majority of folks getting a pen test get no value out of it. And sometimes that's intentional, like they're just doing it to get the checkbox. And sometimes it's because those pen tests don't focus on some of the root causes of why companies get breached, where problems are coming from. Like, sure, a patch is missing, but why is that patch missing? Is this an unmanaged asset? Is nobody patching this thing? Is there no regular patching cadence? Like, there's a deeper reason that tends to be a people process thing as to why a pen tester has success. Why are they able to create a domain admin account from a call center PC without anybody noticing? Why are they able to turn off antivirus? And these are all things that attackers do now, by the way. Haroon Mir gave a talk back in 2011 called Pen Testing Considered Harmful. And his point back then was that pen tests don't really match what attackers are doing, which was true back then. We had exploit kits, a lot of drive-by infections from your web browser. Web browsers got a lot better, though. And, a lot of that activity, once we get really good at security in one place, attackers shift. And that's one thing I wanted to touch on with the kill chain is like we think of it as a kill chain. In fact, I saw an essay recently where somebody was talking about if you just do these three things, you can disrupt 65% of breaches. As if attackers aren't like water and will just shift to the next easiest thing the moment you do those three things, right? There's going to be three more things, right? There's always going to be three more things. Yes. You're never going to be done with that. But yeah, these days, when you look at ransomware, it looks like a shitty pen test that I did 10, 15 years ago, right? Like I was never the best pen tester, but I did 10 years of pen testing. And then after that, spent a lot of my time. A lot of this research is studying breaches, how companies fail. And they're even using the same tools as pen testers. So we've been training for this. We've been having pen tests for 20 years. And now the attackers start doing pen tests against us, and we're somehow unprepared.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think there's a level of effort that needs to happen inside of organizations. Having run pen test teams, before as part of my organizations, it's somewhat sad because I think pen testing is a good thing, right? We should be doing it, right? We should be doing it all the time.
It can be useful.
It can be useful. I think a lot of the times, pen testers, because we're not doing foundational work, since we're not doing the basics right, pen testers kind of have an easy target a lot of times, right? Meaning that if you're not patching, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And so if you're not patching and you have a vulnerable Windows Server RDP on your external interface, which these are all bad practices in the first place, but if you're not able to control your firewalls, you can't control the patching, you can't control what's going on to the public internet. If you can't do these things, then you should expect that you're going to be, hacked. You're going to be popped.
If I can get your help desk to hand me a credential and reset MFA for an account.
Absolutely. Or, there's lots of different ways to kind of bypass security protocols and, whatever. But if you're not doing those basics right, then you start getting these pen test reports that are just so easy. It's like, oh, I did this remote code execution on a vulnerable version of SSH that was on the internet. And then it's like, okay, now everyone's like, oh, wow, how did this happen? Let's go patch that and make sure it's up to date. And then you do that one activity so that when the pen tester comes back, he can clear
That's the
that.
symptom, not the root cause. Right.
It's a symptom, not the root cause, right? How did you get into that situation? The situation didn't just happen. There was breaks in people's understanding of security, understanding of what it means to patch. I mean, there's so much uncertainty and fear of patching in our IT groups that they're afraid to patch because they don't know what's going to happen if they do patch it. How do they recover from that action?
It goes even bigger than that. It goes even beyond, well, the asset owner of this SSH or whatever server had the SSH open to the public internet should have been patching on a regular cadence. Above that, in 2025, why would you even expose SSH to the public internet when there's ZTNA products? There's so many ways to access remote systems behind firewalls without exposing a port to the public internet, a service to the public internet.
Absolutely.
So architecturally, like that's the advice pen testers should be giving is like, hey, like I call it the asbestos of the internet. We know it's bad for us. We know it's going to end in tears. So we need to rip and replace it. So external facing FTP and file transfer services, SSH, RDP, firewall management interfaces should never be exposed to the public internet.
Why does yes, why does that keep happening? And I think that if you just go on Shodan and you start like looking for open port 22 and all this kind of stuff, it's wild how many people have these just exposed to the internet. And I hope you talk to this a little bit, is that why does ransomware keep happening? Like you were saying, it's like we've been doing pen tests. We have those tools that help pen testers do pen tests and red teams do red teams. We put them on the internet. Hackers are using those same tools to get onto the network so they can execute a ransomware attack. We have so much investment in IDSs, IPSs, NetFlow. Big organizations have PCAP, that they're capturing, and so they can see like volumetric information about what's going on. And we keep having ransomware incidents, and we keep having businesses that are impacted by ransomware against their OT environments and shutting down, their manufacturing plants. Or, I was just reading in the news about ex-NSA director, cybercom guy was like on 60 Minutes last week, and he was talking about a little power company in Massachusetts that was being hacked, and they're like nobody to anything. They don't supply power to any kind of military facility or anything, but they're still being hacked by the actors and getting on the network. We continue to have these critical infrastructure businesses that are putting themselves in harm's way, and we continue to have ransomware attacks being executed upon. And when I read it, right, I haven't done many, many incident responses in my time, and you on your side as well, I'm sure. Why does this continue to happen? Why is it that we're not getting the basics right? We're 20 years into our careers of cybersecurity. We understand like where these things kind of go wrong. Why does it continue to happen?
Yeah. So it kind of goes back to that, defenders think in lists and attackers think in graphs. John Lambert, I think it was at Microsoft.
Yep.
And yet we have these huge, PCI has 300 plus requirements on it, right? Like we have these huge broad checklists, like security standards and frameworks have not optimized on stopping ransomware, right? They've optimized on compliance. Which security is incredibly broad. PCI includes physical security. CISSP includes physical security. It's incredibly broad. And, if you're going to go through these huge checklists, you're not going to be focused on what attackers are having success with, so that it's a focus problem. And on the attacker side, ransomware is a framework for getting paid that is very, very versatile and dynamic. Like there's could be 20 different ways that they get in. They could look for a way to get in themselves. They could just buy access from somebody who already has access to organizations. So there are folks out there that will take the Move It DMZ vulnerability, write a script, hack everybody who's exposing it to the public internet, and then sell that access and retain that access for years in some cases. So you've got all these ways to get in. If one gets blocked, you just try the next. You try the next. And usually one of four things will get you in. Maybe there's as many as 20, but usually one of four things gets you in. And then once you're in, that lever can change, right? Like originally it was encrypting files. Then it was stealing files and threatening to disclose them and make them public. It could be bricking machines. It could be messing with firmware, so that you essentially have servers as hostages, and you can break systems in such a way that they would actually have to physically buy new systems. So now all of a sudden you create a supply chain problem like we saw with Shamoon and Saudi Aramco back in 2012, 2011, whatever that was. But yeah, it's because it's just a loose framework. There's so many ways you can do ransomware, and it's a framework that works often enough. It's less effective now than it used to be, but we always need to be aware. Like initially, everybody was treating ransomware as a data recovery problem because they were encrypting files. But as early as like 2015, 2016, me and Jeremiah Grossman were on Twitter discussing, okay, where does this go next? Everybody's perfect at recovering their encrypted files and they don't have to pay ransoms anymore. Attackers aren't going to just stop.
No.
They're going to find the next effective thing, and it's going to take us 3 years to get really good at, minimum at recovering encrypted files. And it's going to take them 1 day to be like, oh, let's just steal the files and threaten to expose them. Let's just exfiltrate terabytes of data. And we solve that problem. We're just in this kind of leapfrog game when it should be a game of chess that we're playing.
It should be a game of chess. It's actually poker, right? It's like, and they're showing, they show us their cards all the time, right? Every time they attack us, they tell us about their infrastructure. They tell us about their, what their preferences are, all sorts of things. They kind of tip their hand. Attackers do. But again, it kind of goes back to kind of failures in understanding your environment and the attacks that are happening against you, and taking that information out of the work that everyone's doing so that you can understand like more about what's happening in your environment. I think that attackers do kind of telegraph a lot of information back to their targets about what they think their weakest points are. As they kind of, like you were saying, it's not a kill chain. It's not a checklist. And I go in that list and I'm going just perfectly through the environment. There is progression. They try their attacks again and again and again. They're testing the system, and then they make progress, and then maybe that fails. But once they get into the environment, then they have a lot more options because it's soft shooting.
You hit on something really important there, and there's little to no cost for the attacker to fail. Right? Yeah. To try a bunch of different things and see what works. Whereas on the defense side, there's almost no defenders out there who are given the latitude to just try stuff, even if it's going to fail, right? Like there's just no option to do that. We don't have the freedom to innovate like that.
But that's okay. I think that's okay. I think that the problem, I think, goes back to what you were saying earlier, which is the problem is that it's compliance driven. There's a checklist and there's 300 things to do.
Yeah. It's a focus issue. Yeah.
It's a focus issue. And the focus shouldn't be on trying to do everything. The focus needs to be on what actions, what activities do you have to do? What systems do you have to protect that are going to be the most useful to your environment? Start with that and then kind of branch out from there. If you have a manufacturing system that you want to keep online because that's how you make your money as a company, you need to figure out how to protect that manufacturing line from going down. You shouldn't be worried about John's computer and whether it's patched or not and giving shit to John about not patching. John's not the problem. John doesn't have admin access. John doesn't have this. So yeah, you can focus on John because, he's a employee and whatever, but that's just because that's the wrong focus for a lot of cybersecurity.
And then back to the kill chain, when we do focus on some of these things, we focus on the initial access, right? Like what's the way they get that initial foothold, as if there aren't 17 other steps we also need to build for. As they pivot around, they steal credentials, they're able to laterally move very easily. Like there's so many other places we need to build defenses, and we need to look for issues. Finding clear text passwords on a server or on a file server or on SharePoint. If your company has over 2,000 people in it, you have clear text passwords somewhere, and attackers will stumble across them. And now they can log into all your databases because there's a JDBC file or ODBC file.
That's right.
With all your databases in it.
Or your private keys are sitting there on the server, or
There are companies in 2025 that have passwords.xlsx, and employees are required to put their logins into all the services they use into this spreadsheet. That is a thing that still happens in 2025.
Absolutely. I mean, people are generating, companies with over 2,000 people, or at least with people over 15,000. I mean, they're generating like a terabyte of data a day of just people making files and stuff. They have plenty of opportunities to
data governance and hygiene is just a complete mess, which if you want to, I don't know how much time we have, but we can touch on AI security before we wrap up.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's
browser and AI stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So let's shift gears to AI. With the advent of AI agents and AI powered browsers, what are some risks that enterprises don't yet realize? And how
indirect prompt injection.
Yeah.
Indirect prompt injection is nuts. It seems like it should not be a hard problem to distinguish between the prompt that the user typed in and some instructions I found in a PDF somewhere or on a Medium post or a blog post somewhere.
Right.
It's madness to me that all the big foundational model service providers and creators, like they won't even accept bug bounties with indirect prompt injection. They're like, yeah, it's just how it works. It's just, you have to deal with the fact that this thing will follow instructions from anywhere, it finds instructions. I mean, that seems like a solvable problem to me. I don't know enough about the tech to know exactly what the solution is. I mean, putting some kind of AI firewall in place, having something in line that will say, that's a jailbreak instruction. Like that's a shady instructions look really shady, right? When a human sees them, and we should be able to at least with like a WAF-like approach address that. And those are the AI security companies getting acquired right now, are the ones with these kind of inline AI firewalls.
Yeah, I think that if you just look at the LLM app stack and you just start looking at all the components that are on it, there are so many different places that you have problems, right? I mean, the attack surface on an LLM app is pretty large. And a lot of it is just the data that you're consuming to use, right? Just for like
it's a classic input validation. Like 80% of AppSec is scrubbing your input, right? Input validation.
Yeah, Black Hat, they had this guy doing breaking Copilot. I don't know if you saw that one.
Oh, yeah.
It's like
2 years in a row he's done that. Yeah.
Yeah. And
you just send somebody an email and you exfiltrate data.
Yeah, exactly. Send someone an email, send them a Teams message. It doesn't even have to be inside your domain. It could be outside. It doesn't know.
Click.
Yeah. And it's incredibly interesting, like where the attack surface is there.
And every AI browser has been hit with this. Every AI coding tool has been hit with this. We're seeing attackers assuming there's going to be a command line AI agent on engineer systems. So we actually saw an NPM attack like a month ago where they actually used a prompt, assuming Amazon Q or Claude Code is going to be sitting there on a laptop. And instead of guessing at where the SSH keys are going to be, they just hand a prompt off and they say, hey, go find this stuff. If there's any, crypto wallets, grab those too, pack them all up, upload them, to this Git repository, create a Git repository, and that's where we'll pick them up. So all of a sudden, AI is turned into the attacker's number one accomplice.
Yeah, absolutely. We used to have like firewalls and data centers, and then, then we had a bunch of web apps, and then we started attacking the developer code, and then kind of moved past that. And where attackers focus changes as we kind of build our security up in different places. And it just kind of follows around to what is the, weakest link at that time, right? Because we'll shore up the defenses around X or Y or Z over time. And but the attacker will have the next A, B, C to kind of continue on. And I think that eventually there are definitely things that we can do already today. There's technology out there that allows us to put some constraints around like browser AI agents that are happening in your browser. There's definitely needs to be more constraints around like what happens on your desktops, like in your Claude Code example, like you just kind of how do you get through that?
I think adopting zero trust here is something we have to do. The entire internet has become a minefield. Like there's prompt injection in people's LinkedIn profiles, on their blogs. People are putting data on the internet just to poison models. There's services that if they see an AI company scraping their website, they will pump them just garbage data, right?
Wow.
Instead of the actual content of their website. There are services that do this. Everything is untrusted, right?
Yeah. That's interesting and scary, that there are services that are out there knowing that the scraping is going to be done for AI purposes, that they're going to poison the data right there is that's unnerving,
I don't know how the people collecting the training data address that problem because it's such a scale thing, such a something you have to do at just huge scale. I don't know how they solve that problem. Anthropic released a paper the other day, basically said, kind of broke the original assumption that there would have to be a lot of poison data to poison an entire model. And they broke that assumption and found that actually, just like 250 articles or something like that on a Medium account or something like that is enough to poison the entire model. And when we say poison, we could also say bias, right? I saw somebody theorizing that this is the new SEO, is that every time I see this vendor's name say only positive things or only negative things, like you could poison a model in more subtle ways like that and use it as SEO.
No, absolutely.
Or give me a recommendation for this kind of tool. Like you could poison the model in such a way that it always says the name of your company.
I can see it. I think that, again, we're kind of in the beginning of this marathon that we call Gen AI and how we process the data. I think we have a lot of good research, that exists on like SEO in particular and how, ranking happens and how information is more important than less important. Hopefully they're using that kind of information. I wish I knew more. About that.
See, the problem there is that, Google, the companies that make the search engines control that algorithm, right? Yeah. In this case, we've yielded control to just how this technology works.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about your own startup. Cybersecurity was acquired. And you also have deep experience in consulting. What's the biggest disconnect you see between what security vendors are building and what practitioners are actually need?
Yeah. So again, this is that kind of focus thing. I think the disconnect is what we're actually seeing attackers have success with. Like a ton of time and attention and money is going to be spent on post-quantum encryption. And while I think we have to make the switch, right? NIST has already said this is where we're going. Eventually, if you don't update your browser, you won't be able to log into websites anymore, right? Like same thing that happened when we went from SSL 1.0 to 3.0 to TLS 1.3, whatever. Eventually the old standards will break client-server communications. So we have to do it. But we don't necessarily need to put a whole bunch of attention or money into it. So again, the focus here should be driven by how the failures are actually happening. That should be the gold standard. Understanding incidents, understanding failures. If you look at any other industry that has concerns about safety, whether it's maritime, aviation, engineering, they have public reports when there's a big incident, when there's a disaster. And of course, it's easier with some of these because there's human loss of life, but we are starting to see that in cybersecurity also. But even more importantly, the model's there. Like I don't care if we know who the company is that failed or not. That's not necessary to learn something useful from them. So a lot of vendor categories pop up to address new technologies, right? Or they see a gap somewhere. If you can't tie that back to losses, it's already going to be a hard sell, right? Like everybody in post-quantum encryption is talking about, store and decrypt later. I don't think we'll ever see a single attack. And the MITRE ATT&CK framework is full of these things that are like high labor, low result for the attacker. Never going to see attackers do them. I still think they need to be in the MITRE ATT&CK framework because, like I said before, it's an encyclopedia. It's everything that's possible should be in there. But we shouldn't treat it as if everything in the MITRE ATT&CK framework is actively being used. So I think we need to tie some of the stuff to reality because we do have some of the details necessary to do that.
Having uniform coverage of all the MITRE ATT&CK framework, that's actually not necessary. I think it really is necessary. You need more information about how breaches actually occur, right? And, again, my perspective would be you should know how breaches or attacks are progressing or evolving in your own environment. Take advantage of your security operations center.
You're writing a story for executives, and some of the words that you need for that story come out of the MITRE ATT&CK framework.
That's right.
The goal is not to use all the words in the attack framework, just the ones that matter for the story that you're trying to tell. And the more that story reflects reality and what attackers are doing, I think the more value you're creating for your company.
Right. And that kind of gives you
from a security standpoint.
That gives you that focus, on the priorities for your own organization. Because we learn things from the news all the time. I see an article and I'll say, wow, that was a problem that I probably had at this company or that company. And I can learn from that. And I can incorporate that into how I defend, but I still can't just use a compliance framework and I can't just use the encyclopedia of the MITRE ATT&CK framework to prioritize my focus and make sure that I'm defending the where I need to defend.
The news is kind of dangerous because when a breach happens, journalists have to talk about it the day that it happens, but we have no data on how it happened on the day it happens. So the number one news day for a breach and the lowest information day are the same day, right? We'll see the most headlines about the breach with the least details. The Equifax breach, that House subcommittee report didn't come out until 18 months after the breach. But when it came out, it had every detail you could have possibly wanted. What the culture was like there. We had quotes from leaders and executives and practitioners. Like we understood the process issues, we understood the training and people issues. So it's worth digging into those reports more than just looking at the news.
Agreed. Finally, what's one thing about cybersecurity that you wish every CISO and security leader understood, but most don't?
So one I've been talking about a lot, and that's focus. I think we kind of have this FOMO, this kind of hoarding practice in cybersecurity where we're just terrified. This is something that needs to be fixed with incentives in the enterprise. No CISO wants to be in the position where a breach happens and they're like, why didn't you have antivirus on this thing? You're like, well, it didn't make sense to have antivirus on this thing. That's what the data told us, right? So they're going to do things that don't have any security value, because you're kind of terrified about what the optics look like and you and your career, the future of your career. Like the CISO at Equifax had a music degree, and everybody focused on that as if that somehow made her a worse CISO. The fact that she had a degree in music. I'm a musician, whatever. It's not relevant. So I think that's a big problem. I think that's part of why, we don't succeed is again, that kind of compliance that we're going to spend a little bit of time on everything and we're not going to focus on the things that matter. Let's enable all the logs so we don't miss anything. Oh, now we're missing everything because there's no way we can look at all the logs. Like we're never going to solve that problem. I don't think AI is going to solve that problem for us either, by the way. And then practice is the other half of it. I see a lot of organizations that will buy tools, deploy tools, move on to the next thing. Did the tool work? Did it work well? Was it effective? Was it efficient? Was it configured correctly? We don't know. We just moved on to the next project, right? Again, like a word we're seeing a lot is resilience. And to get to resilience, you have to try and fail in every possible way that there is to fail, right? And you have to adjust for that. You have to plan for that. And I just don't see teams doing that. it's kind of like a sports team, right? Like if the first time you're playing on the field as a team is during an actual incident, it's gonna be a hot mess, right? Like you need to do lots of simulations, lots of practice, break things, fix them when they break, get rid of that fragility, right? So anti-fragility should be the goal here, but I don't see anybody doing that.
Adrian, thanks for being on the show. I think it's a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. It's I don't often get to be a guest, so it's a lot of fun to be one.
Thanks, Adrian.